The outpost was dying in stages, not all at once. First went the long-range sensors, burned out by a near miss that rattled the station's spine and sent a shudder through every deck. Then the outer shield grid collapsed in sections, flickering like a tired heartbeat, each failure marked by a dull tremor and the hiss of venting plasma somewhere far away. Emergency lights replaced the calm white glow of standard illumination, washing the corridors in amber and shadow. No one ran. That was the strangest part. Captain Irel stood on the command dais, hands clasped behind her back, watching the tactical display update itself into irrelevance. Red threat markers crept closer, their trajectories converging with patient certainty. The enemy fleet had stopped firing hours ago. They no longer needed to. The outpost couldn't escape, couldn't fight, and couldn't hide. This phase of the siege was called the waiting. Crew stations were half empty, not because people had fled, but because there was no reason to keep them manned. Power was being rationed to life support and internal gravity. Weapons control had been shut down to preserve what little energy remained. Even communications ran on a reduced cycle, the transmitters warming slowly between users like old machines reluctant to wake again. A junior officer cleared his throat. "Captain, engineering reports core containment will hold for another 17 cycles. After that." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Irel nodded once. Understood. 17 cycles was generous. Enough time to send a message. Enough time to choose how they would be remembered. She turned toward the communications pit. "Begin final transmission protocol." There was no cheer. No gasp. Just quiet acknowledgement. They had discussed this hours earlier, when the shields first dropped below recovery thresholds. There had been debate then, arguments, even. Some had wanted to keep broadcasting distress signals, repeating the SOS on every open band until the enemy jammed them or destroyed the array. Others had argued for silence, for denying the attackers the satisfaction of fear. In the end, they had chosen something else. Not a plea. A record. The communications officer's fingers hovered over the console, suddenly hesitant. "All channels, Captain." Irel shook her head. "Archive bands only. Long-duration frequencies. The ones meant to outlast us." The officer swallowed and nodded. Around the bridge, crew members straightened unconsciously. Not in fear, but in composure. Uniforms were adjusted. Shoulders squared. One last habit of professionalism in a universe that would not reward it. The recorder light blinked to life. Captain Irel stepped forward, her voice steady, measured, and clear. "This is Outpost Kepri 9, she began. Designation, Civilian Research and Relay Station. Population at time of transmission, 246. She paused, then corrected herself. 243. No one reacted. The number had been changing all day. "We are transmitting this message as a historical record," she continued. "Not as a request for assistance. Enemy presence has achieved total orbital dominance. Evacuation is impossible." The words felt heavy, but honest. She had learned long ago that truth, delivered plainly, carried its own dignity. This outpost served as a cultural and scientific exchange point for 6 neighboring systems. Our work included stellar mapping, linguistic preservation, and medical data archiving. Copies of all research are attached to this transmission. The enemy fleet drifted closer on the display, silent and vast. They were taking their time. Predators savoring the inevitability of the end. Irel went on. "To whoever finds this message, know that we did not fall suddenly. We did not fall screaming. We fulfilled our duty until the limits of physics and chance made further action meaningless." Behind her, a faint tremor ran through the deck as another external structure failed. Somewhere deep in the station, metal groaned. She allowed herself a breath. There is no call for vengeance in this record. No demand for justice. Only acknowledgement. Her gaze drifted, briefly, to the crew standing at their stations, scientists, technicians, navigators, beings who had never carried weapons except by regulation. They met her eyes without fear. "We existed," Irel said softly. "We learned. We tried to leave the galaxy better than we found it." The communications officer glanced up. The recorder light still burned steadily. Iroh straightened. Transmission will repeat automatically at diminishing power levels until system failure. If you are hearing this, then time has done what we could not. She hesitated for the first time. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "We do not expect a reply." The recorder clicked off. For a moment, the bridge was utterly silent, save for the distant hum of strained reactors and the faint crackle of damaged circuitry. The message began its loop, launching itself into the dark on frequencies designed to drift for centuries. A farewell meant for no one in particular. The communications officer leaned back, exhaling shakily. "It's done." Iroh nodded. "Thank you." She turned back toward the tactical display, and froze. A new contact had appeared. Not hostile. Not matching any known enemy signature. A single pulse, faint but unmistakable, had brushed the edge of their sensors, so old, so oddly tuned that the system hesitated before classifying it at all. The computer tagged it with a neutral marker. Incoming signal detected. Iroh felt a chill run through her scales. That wasn't possible. She leaned forward slowly. "Source." The officer stared at the screen, disbelief creeping into his voice. "Unknown. But, Captain." "Yes." "It's responding to the archive band." The band no one listened to anymore. The band meant for ghosts. Somewhere beyond the dying outpost, in the vast dark between stars, something had heard a message that was never meant to be answered. The bridge did not erupt into celebration. That, later, would be remembered as the first sign that the signal was wrong. Captain Iroh stared at the display as the neutral marker stabilized, its data string crawling with errors and question marks. The contact was distant, far beyond the outer perimeter of the system, but unmistakably real. It wasn't a ghost echo or sensor artifact. It had mass, direction, intent. More unsettling still, it was answering them. "Run a full spectrum analysis," Iroh said quietly. "I want everything. Energy profile, propulsion signature, comms modulation. If it exists, I want to know how it breathes." The tactical officer hesitated. "Captain, the frequency match is exact. It's locked to our archive band. No modern fleet uses that range. The harmonics alone." "I know," Iroh said. "That's why I want confirmation." Around them, crew members leaned in, tension tightening shoulders that had already accepted death. Hope, arriving uninvited, was a dangerous thing. It made promises. It reopened wounds. The analysis scrolled in fragments. Incomplete. Contradictory. "Propulsion doesn't match anything in the registry," the officer continued. "It's not hyperslip. Not jump gate. It's layered. Like multiple systems running in parallel." "Military?" someone asked. The officer shook his head slowly. "I don't know. There's power there. A lot of it. But it's not spiking. No weapons charging. No targeting locks." Silence fell again. Iroh folded her arms. "Then who answers a farewell message?" No one spoke. Everyone on the bridge already knew the only rumor that fit. The name surfaced unspoken, heavy with old unease. Humans. The galaxy had dozens of euphemisms for them, none flattering. Deathworlders. Survivors by accident. The statistical error that refused to correct itself. They came from a planet whose gravity crushed bone density standards, whose atmosphere brewed storms that flattened cities, whose biosphere evolved not for cooperation but for competition. Every ecosystem was a battleground. Every life form a potential threat. And somehow, impossibly, they had crawled out of it. The first time humanity appeared on interstellar records, most analysts assumed a mistake. The second time, an anomaly. By the third, the galaxy quietly updated its threat assessments and pretended the problem would resolve itself. It didn't. Humans didn't expand like conquerors. They didn't announce themselves with empires or crusades. They simply endured. Where other species collapsed under scarcity, humans adapted. Where others retreated, humans improvised. Where extinction events erased civilizations, humans recorded the data and built again. They survived things that should have ended them. That made everyone nervous. Official policy classified them as strategically unpredictable. Unofficial policy was simpler: avoid, observe, never rely. Especially not in war. Iril remembered the briefing from years ago, delivered with the calm tone of someone reciting an inconvenient truth. If humans answer a signal, it's already too late to pretend they don't exist. "Captain," the communications officer said, pulling her back. "We're receiving a structured transmission now. Still low power. Still on archive band." Iril's jaw tightened. On screen. The signal unfolded slowly, as if aware of the fragile systems receiving it. No burst. No flood. Just a careful handshake, matching their decaying protocols with unsettling precision. Text resolved first. Archive signal received. Source: human fleet element. Time offset: synchronized. A murmur rippled across the bridge. Human. Confirmed. Fleet element, the tactical officer echoed. That implies more than one vessel. The sensors updated again. More contacts appeared. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands. They emerged without flare or distortion, resolving from nothing into shapes that made the bridge feel suddenly very small. Massive silhouettes slid into sensor range, each one distinct, each one carrying signatures that defied standard classification. No two ships matched perfectly. Some were long and angular, layered with armor like sedimentary rock. Others were compact and dense, their mass readings absurd for their size. A few bore scars, ancient, repaired, layered over again and again. These were not ships built in one era. They were ships that had survived multiple. "They are forming up," the tactical officer whispered. "Not attack vectors. Defensive lattice." The enemy fleet, once so patient, reacted at last. Energy spikes flared as weapons came online. Jamming fields swept the system. The human ships ignored them. Instead, a single transmission cut through the noise, routed directly to the bridge. Audio only. A voice filled the space, not loud, not theatrical. Just steady. "This is the human fleet resolute witness," it said. "To outpost Kepri 9. The translation software lagged for half a heartbeat, then caught up. "We received your message." Iril felt something tighten in her chest. The voice continued, almost gently. "You said you did not expect a reply." A pause. "Deliberate. We don't leave messages like that unanswered." Around the bridge, hardened professionals stared at the display, breath held, fear and something dangerously close to relief warring in their eyes. Beyond the hull, between the dying station and the enemy armada, the Deathworlders took their place, silent, immovable, and very much real. And for the first time since the siege began, the waiting changed its meaning. The enemy fleet hesitated. 4 hours, they had advanced with the unhurried confidence of inevitability, formation tight, weapons idle, commanders secure in the knowledge that outpost Kepri 9 could not escape the math of its own destruction. Now, that certainty fractured. On the tactical display, the hostile icons wavered. Course corrections rippled through their formation, subtle at first, then increasingly erratic. Energy spikes flared and vanished as targeting solutions were recalculated and discarded. They had not expected this. Captain Iril watched in silence as the human ships finished assembling their lattice. It was not a wall in the traditional sense, there were gaps wide enough to fly a cruiser through, but the positioning was deliberate. Every angle covered. Every vector accounted for. It was a defense designed not to block space, but to own it. "Scan resolution still improving," the tactical officer said, voice tight with awe. "Captain, these vessels aren't sharing a standardized architecture. Different hull geometries, different energy profiles, even different command doctrines." Iril nodded slowly. "They didn't come from one navy." "No," the officer agreed. "This looks like everyone." That realization settled heavily over the bridge. The human fleet was not uniform because it was not centralized. It was a gathering, ships from different worlds, different eras, different wars, answering the same call without being told to. And they had arrived fast. Too fast. "FTL residue is wrong," the science officer added, scrolling through data that refused to behave. They didn't translate in the usual sense. It's like they folded local space around themselves and stepped through. No wake. No warning. Iroh exhaled slowly. They didn't want to be seen until they were already here. On the main display, the closest human ship rotated slightly, bringing its broadside between the outpost and the enemy. It did not raise shields. It didn't need to. Its hull readings were dense, layered, composite materials stacked in ways that suggested not just protection, but redundancy, systems built to fail and continue anyway. A civilization that assumed things would break. The enemy commander broke the silence. A tight beam transmission stabbed toward the human formation, aggressive and sharp. The translation came through laced with disdain. Unregistered vessels, the voice snapped. This system is under lawful reclamation. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. The words echoed on the bridge of Kepri 9, hollow and desperate. The humans did not respond. Instead, something changed. The space around the human fleet shifted. It was subtle, so subtle that the sensors argued with themselves before confirming it, but the vacuum itself seemed to stiffen. Local gravity readings fluctuated by fractional degrees. Radiation levels dipped, then stabilized. "Captain," the science officer whispered. "They're anchoring the battle space." Iroh's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "They're fixing local constants. Microadjustments to spacetime parameters. It's defensive, but," the officer swallowed. "It means nothing moves here unless they allow it." The enemy fleet fired. It was not a barrage, but a test, a spread of high-yield kinetic and energy weapons launched simultaneously, meant to probe shields, to map reactions. The projectiles crossed the void. Then, stopped. Not detonated. Not deflected. Stopped. They hung in space, frozen mid-trajectory like artifacts in a museum of failed violence. Energy beams twisted, their coherence unraveling into harmless light before dissipating entirely. No explosion. No counterfire. The bridge of Kepri 9 went utterly still. "What did they just do?" someone breathed. Iroh didn't answer. She was watching the human fleet. No weapons ports opened. No engines flared. The ships held position, unbothered, as if this outcome had been calculated long before the first shot was fired. A second transmission finally came, this one broad spectrum, addressed not just to the enemy fleet, but to the system itself. The same calm human voice spoke. "This is not a battlefield," it said. A pause, heavy with meaning. "This is a rescue perimeter." The enemy fleet scrambled. Power surged as they attempted to retreat, to jump, to flee the space they suddenly no longer controlled. They failed. Jump drives refused to engage. FTL spools spun uselessly against constraints they could not overcome. Even sublight maneuvers became sluggish, as though the void itself resisted them. "They can't leave," the tactical officer said softly. "They can't even reposition effectively." Iroh felt the weight of that settle into her bones. The humans had not arrived to fight. They had arrived to decide. Between the outpost and its would-be executioners, the Deathwelder fleet waited, silent, patient, and terrifyingly restrained. And for the first time since the siege began, Captain Iroh allowed herself to believe something she hadn't dared consider before. They might survive this. Not because the humans were angry. Not because they were cruel. But because they had shown up at all. Beyond the hull, human warships, scarred, mismatched, and impossibly steady, held the dark at bay. They did not announce victory. They did not threaten. They simply stood there. And the universe, for once, listened. The enemy fleet did not surrender. They tried everything else first. Power surged through their formations in chaotic waves as commanders barked orders across encrypted channels. Secondary drives flared, then died. Emergency subspace pings screamed into the void, looking for anchors that no longer existed. One cruiser attempted a blind microjump anyway. Its hull buckled mid-transition and snapped back into real space, crippled but intact, drifting helplessly. The humans let it happen. They did not exploit the failure. They did not fire on the damaged ship or move to capture it. They merely adjusted the lattice by a fraction, tightening the invisible boundaries that defined the rescue perimeter. Captain Iroh watched the display, disbelief slowly overtaking dread. "They're containing them," the tactical officer said. "Not attacking. Not retreating. Just holding." "Yes," Irol replied quietly. "Like hazardous material." A private channel blinked to life on her console. Human origin. Direct. Encrypted, but offered openly. She hesitated only a moment before accepting. The same voice filled the bridge again, closer this time, still calm, still unhurried. "Captain Irol of Outpost Kepri 9, it said. "This is Commander Hale, acting coordinator for the Resolute Witness Fleet." Her name. Her station. Confirmed. "You have us," Irol said, keeping her voice steady. "We did not request intervention." There was the faintest trace of something in the commander's reply. Amusement, perhaps. Or understanding. "No," Hale said. "You didn't. You documented loss." A pause. "We read those differently." On the tactical display, the enemy fleet made one last attempt at escalation. Energy spiked across their largest capital ships as they reconfigured weapons, less refined now, more desperate. "They are overloading," the science officer warned. "If they fire like that, the recoil alone could tear them apart." Commander Hale spoke again, as if he could hear the concern echoing across the alien bridge. "We're about to end this," he said. "You might want to look away." Irol didn't. She watched. The human fleet moved for the first time since its arrival. Not forward. Sideways. Space folded along precise vectors, human ships sliding through dimensions the outpost sensors could barely track. They did not close distance in the traditional sense. Instead, the enemy fleet found itself reclassified. The stars behind them changed. Constellations twisted. Background radiation spiked, then normalized. They were no longer where they had been. "Captain," the tactical officer whispered. "Enemy ships are gone." Irol shook her head slowly. "No. They are still here." The sensors confirmed it seconds later. The hostile fleet remained intact, engines functional, life signs stable, weapons silent. But they were no longer in the Kepri system. They had been displaced. Relocated to a volume of space wrapped in human containment fields, an artificial pocket, isolated from trade routes, communications relays, and strategic lanes. A prison without walls. "They didn't destroy them," someone said softly. "No," Irol replied. "They removed them." Commander Hale's voice returned, almost conversational. "Enemy forces have been extracted and quarantined," he said. "No casualties. Their vessels will remain stable. They will be retrieved by their own governments once appropriate safeguards are agreed upon." Appropriate safeguards. Irol exhaled slowly, feeling something inside her chest loosen for the first time in days. "And if those governments refuse?" she asked. There was a pause. "Then the ships stay where they are," Hale said. "Indefinitely." Silence followed, not from the humans, but from the galaxy itself. No alarms. No more hostile signals. Just the steady hum of the outpost's failing systems, suddenly no longer under threat. Human vessels began to peel away from the lattice, not departing, but working. Smaller craft detached, swarming toward the damaged station. Repair drones fanned out like schools of metallic fish, latching onto ruptured hull plates, sealing breaches, rerouting power. Engineering readout spiked, then stabilized. "Captain," the chief engineer said, voice breaking despite himself. "They are reinforcing our core. They've already compensated for containment loss." I don't know how they are doing this so fast." "They planned for it," Irol said quietly. She opened a channel again. "Commander Hale. You've secured the system. Why stay?" The answer came without hesitation. "Because rescue isn't finished when the threat leaves," Hale replied. "It's finished when the survivors are safe." On the bridge, crew members stared at their consoles as systems they had written off as dead flickered back to life. Lights brightened. Gravity stabilized. The station breathed again. Human ships did not linger dramatically. They did not demand recognition or gratitude. They simply worked, methodical, precise, almost gentle. Irol watched them through the viewport, vast, scarred hulls drifting in protective orbits, bearing the marks of countless battles and repairs layered over one another like history itself. She realized then what made humans terrifying to the galaxy. Not their weapons. Not their technology. But their refusal to accept that loss was final. They did not ask permission to save lives. They did not wait for consensus. When someone documented an ending, humans arrived and rewrote it. And somewhere in the dark, far beyond the repaired walls of Kepri 9, the galaxy quietly took note. Outpost Kepri 9 was supposed to be a footnote. A static archive drifting through the dark. A message meant for historians and ghosts. Instead, it became a reference point. Repairs continued for days, human days, which the station systems soon learned to translate into cycles that never truly paused. Human crews rotated in shifts that made no sense to alien schedulers, working through fatigue with a calm persistence that bordered on stubbornness. When one team stood down, another took its place without ceremony. They did not ask permission. They simply fixed what was broken. Captain Irel walked the corridors again, no longer lit by emergency amber but by restored white light. Hull breaches were sealed with unfamiliar alloys that adapted to Kepri 9's structure as if they had always belonged there. Power conduits hummed steadily. Life support ran at optimal levels for the first time since the siege began. The outpost lived. In the central operations hall, a human engineer knelt beside an open panel, hands moving with practiced ease. He glanced up as Irel passed and offered a small nod. Nothing deferential, nothing dismissive. Just acknowledgement. You didn't have to do all this, she said, stopping. The engineer considered her words for a moment. Yeah, he said. We did. That seemed to be the end of the discussion. News traveled fast. Within a single rotation, independent relays picked up the altered status of the Kepri system. The enemy fleet's disappearance triggered inquiries, protests, and accusations. Diplomatic channels flooded with demands for explanations. Human responses were uniform, almost boring in their consistency. No treaties were violated. No weapons were fired. No lives were taken. The hostile fleet still existed, intact, stable, and alive. They were simply no longer here. Galactic authorities struggled with that. There were no precedents for a war that ended without battle. No legal framework for a rescue that also functioned as containment. Emergency councils convened. Definitions were argued. Classifications were revised. None of it changed the facts. Humans had answered a farewell message. Irel was present when the final human transmission was prepared, not broadcast across the galaxy, but appended quietly to the original SOS archive. The same band. The same protocol. The message was brief. Archive update, addendum. Status, survivors confirmed. Kepri 9 is operational. No embellishment. No signature flourish. Just a correction. When the resolute witness fleet finally prepared to depart, there was no ceremony. Human ships disengaged from orbit one by one, their vast forms sliding back into the dark with the same unsettling quiet they had arrived in. Captain Irel stood on the command deck, watching the last of them align for departure. Commander Hale, she said over the open channel, the galaxy will ask why you came. Hale's voice carried the faintest hint of warmth. They already know, he replied. They just don't like the answer. And that is... A pause. That when someone sends a message saying they're gone, Hale said, we show up to prove they are wrong. The channel closed. Space folded. The human fleet vanished. In the days that followed, classifications were updated across dozens of star charts and databases. Humans were no longer listed merely as Deathwelders. A new designation appeared beneath the old one, approved quietly, without fanfare. Last responders. The term spread, not as propaganda, but as warning and reassurance in equal measure. If you were powerful, it meant humans would not fear you. If you were cruel, it meant they would not ignore you. And if you were lost, truly lost, it meant someone might still come. Captain Irel stood once more before the archive console where the farewell message had been recorded. She replayed it, listening to her own voice from days earlier. We do not expect a reply. She smiled, just slightly. The galaxy had heard those words before, from worlds that vanished, from species that faded without witnesses. This time, The record was different. This time, the final line belonged to humanity. They were not lost. They were found. And somewhere out in the dark, messages meant for no one drifted a little less alone, because the universe now knew one thing with absolute certainty. When hope signs off, humans log in.